What's up, guys? Welcome to a special series wrap-up episode of Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Tim Bridgewater. If you have been subscribed to this podcast and you have been listening, you realize that I have not updated the podcast in some time. I decided that I was not going to continue the podcast because, to be honest with you, I just wasn't enjoying Dragon Ball Daima. I mean, I tend to think of myself as being kind of a more positive person, and something just didn't feel right about sitting down and talking about a show that I was really hating every single week. It was just a level of negative energy that I just didn't feel like participating in, and I didn't like it. And there's nothing fun about talking about a show that you just don't really like. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that I have to like everything that I watch, right? I mean, Dragon Ball Super definitely had its bad episodes too, but then it had good episodes as well. And it was, you know what I mean? We got a string of about 8 or 9 episodes in a row that I just thought were terrible. So I didn't see a point in sitting down and talking about it every single week. So if you happen to be someone who's listening to this podcast for the first time, that is why there are no episodes 11 through 20 for the podcast, because I decided after 10 episodes, I was just going to let it go. I was not enjoying the show. And not only that, people weren't really listening to the podcast either. I mean, I go into all of this stuff in the previous episodes. So if you're curious about that, you can go back and listen to all of that. I won't go into that too much deeply here. I just want to say that I decided that I was going to come back now that the show has ended. If you guys are not aware, today, Friday, May 16th, the English dub version of Dragon Ball Daima has come to a close, because today they actually released episodes 19 and 20 at the same time on Crunchyroll. Okay, so now it's done. And I figured, since I didn't talk about anything beyond episode 10, that I would come back with one final episode to kind of close this out, and most importantly, touch upon some of the major developments that happened in Dragon Ball Daima, because we had some transformations that happened here that were pretty important. And obviously we're going to get into spoilers here. So if you have not seen episodes 19 and 20 yet, then you're going to want to watch those first before you listen to this. But if you're anything like me, then you were probably spoiled weeks ago about most of this stuff. Okay. So with that being said, listen, we're going to go ahead and jump into it. And I do also have an email for this episode, for our email segment, which is called What Are You Saying? I have an email from Brent that I got a couple weeks ago, or maybe even a few months at this point, and I just never got a chance to read it because there were no podcast episodes to read it on. So I'll read that one on this episode. We'll save that after we talk about the wrap up. Okay. So with that being said, everything from this point on, spoiler warning. Okay. Now, obviously I decided to come back for one more episode, right? I think that it's fair for me to sit down and take a bit of a break to think about Dragon Ball Daima as a whole. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are wondering, well, what happened after episode 10? Tim, did you enjoy what you saw? Do you still feel the same way that you felt 10 episodes ago? And where do you stand now? What do you think about Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta? Okay, what do you think about Super Saiyan 4 Goku and beyond? So that's the point of this episode. I'm going to kind of just close out my thoughts, and so I'll just start by saying that I am still very much so largely disappointed with Dragon Ball Daima. It is my least favorite Dragon Ball show out of the, how many have they had technically? I mean, if you count the main canon stuff, we had Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Super, and Dragon Ball Daima. Okay, so it's 5, right? I know there's also Dragon Ball Heroes and stuff like that, but that's not canon, right? Yeah. So with that being said, I enjoy Dragon Ball GT more than I enjoy Daima, but also Dragon Ball Daima was also a lot shorter. So I'm not even sure if it's a fair comparison to make, because we only had 20 episodes of Daima, which means they had to get it right in 20 episodes. Do I feel like they got it right in 20 episodes? Absolutely not. I feel like 85% of the episodes we got were pointless, useless, didn't mean anything, just repetitive bullshit, delays, stretching the story out for no good reason. And I talk about all of that in the first 10 episodes of the podcast. So if you want to hear my specific breakdown on that, you got episodes there where I go into all of it. Okay. So, was the remaining 10 episodes of Daima enough to change my opinion of that? Of course not. And I'm not even going to talk in detail about a lot of that other stuff that happened, because I mean, I will admit that the story did improve. It did pick up. We started getting a series of episodes that were largely contributing to the story and developing the story, but still not as much as I would have liked, considering the fact that we only had 10 episodes left. There was still a lot of pointless stuff in there with a lot of pointless characters that I just don't really get. Let's just say this. I mean, the last 4 episodes of Dragon Ball Daima were the most exciting episodes of the entire series, because we finally got to our destination and it was time to fight the final battle. And that's always the most exciting part, I feel like, of these Dragon Ball stories. So that's not surprising to me. I just largely feel that the writers of modern day Dragon Ball, and I don't know how much of this Toriyama had to, do with, but a lot of the writers of modern day Dragon Ball, it just seems to be more about flashy fights and transformations than it is about stakes, characters, and story. Okay. Dragon Ball Z was not perfect by any means. We all know that there was a lot of plot holes and shit in there, but we also know that there was really strong story elements and some really fun characters and and most importantly, there were stakes. Okay. Stakes. Okay. And I don't remember the last time I felt like there was any real stakes in Dragon Ball. And that includes Dragon Ball Super. Right. Because they're just spending less time building these things up and less time explaining these things and making them feel justified when you get to the end. For example, obviously Goma is our big final boss in Daima, right? While I do feel like we spent a significant amount of time with Goma, I don't feel like he was developed enough to justify this epic 4-part battle with him. You know what I mean? And it just didn't have the same amount of gravitas and weight to it that other villains have had. Goma pretty much became Supreme Demon King, I don't know, a week ago in their timeline. I mean, it hasn't been that long. Right. And we really didn't get to see him do anything that bad. So for us to have this big, exciting, release from watching this fight with him at the end, he needed to be established as being a villain. And I don't think they did a good job of that. I mean, all we really did was hear him bitch about stuff and yell. And honestly, he was more comedic than anything. He seemed more silly than anything. And that's okay, because we also have Majin Buu as a character, right? Who was also kind of silly. I mean, all the villains kind of had a little bit of silliness to them, I would say, with the exception of Frieza. I mean, there was nothing really silly about Frieza. Frieza was stone cold, ruthless, basically his entire saga in Dragon Ball Z. Okay. We didn't get into the more sillier shit than, until we got to Cell, which Cell was largely pretty serious too. But the whole concept of a Cell Games was a little bit weird, right? And then of course, they just threw caution to the wind with Boo. I mean, they just didn't give a fuck anymore by that point. So I don't feel like Goma was a very particularly interesting villain, especially, watching him being defeated at the end didn't really feel like it meant much, because we didn't really get to see much of his reign. In Dragon Ball Z, we saw villains kill people. We saw, Vegeta and Nappa showed up on Earth and started wiping people out. They killed some of our favorite characters, some of the main characters. Frieza killed some of the main characters. Frieza killed all sorts of Namekians and people on planet Namek. I mean, it was serious business. Cell showed up, started absorbing everybody in grotesque ways. I remember episodes where they kind of showed him like, it was almost like a horror film. You know what I mean? The way that they kind of presented some of that stuff. So by the time we got to the final battles with them, it felt heavy. It felt like it meant something. Even Boo, with all of his ridiculous transformations, we saw Boo kill a lot of people and do some really shitty stuff. I mean, Kid Boo pretty much killed everybody on the planet, right? So when it was time for that final battle, it felt like it meant something. What's the worst thing we saw Goma do in this series? Go ahead. I'm sure you're probably yelling at your podcast right now. Just go ahead. I'll give you a second. Think about it. Okay. Think about it. He kidnapped Dende, but didn't hurt him at all. Actually took pretty good care of him. So I'm not sure what the problem was. They kind of hinted at some things with these collars, okay, which is the whole collar thing is something that didn't really get resolved, I feel like. The mention of these collars around people's necks, the series just ended without resolving that at all. I mean, unless I missed something, I only watched the episodes once. Okay. So it's possible there was a quick mention of that in there somewhere, but I don't think there was. So to me, that felt unresolved. And why even introduce this aspect of people having these collars around their necks if it doesn't essentially mean anything? With that being said, I feel like Pansy's character was largely useless. I'm not sure why she was there. I feel like you can take her out of the series and have everything still happen the exact same way. Okay. I do feel like Glorio served a purpose, and he did have a little bit of an arc, even though it wasn't the most exciting, surprising, shocking sort of an arc. But they did do something there with Glorio. I was waiting for a little bit more explanation as to why he chose to work with Aransu, and they kind of touched upon it a little bit at the end there, where they implied that she saved him from his demon world to some extent, but I would have liked to have known more. I mean, I feel like we had 20 episodes, so we had plenty of time to explore that stuff, but we spent time with bullshit stuff like sky seeds and fusion bugs that they didn't even use, traveling back and forth, a sea of darkness or whatever the hell they call, just stuff like that just didn't matter. Stuff like that didn't matter. A weird minotaur creature that came out of nowhere and didn't matter to the story at all. A kraken that didn't matter to the story. I mean, it's just a lot of stuff like that in there. But the interesting things that they did have were the Tamagami, the dragon, the Demon World Dragon Balls. Aransu was kind of compelling in her involvement in the creation of Majin Buu along with Marba. I mean, that I didn't mind that stuff. I felt like that was pretty good, but I think they could have done more there. They definitely could have done more with the idea that Aransu and Degasu were Supreme Kai's siblings. That just seemed like it didn't matter, right? Especially Degasu just ended up being a pointless character by the end of the series. He really didn't do anything. They could have replaced Degasu with another generic character and it wouldn't have mattered, right? Like, they didn't take advantage of the fact that Degasu and Supreme Kai were siblings. That should have meant something to the story. And the same thing with Aransu, right? Meant nothing. Could have been three completely different characters. There was no reason for them to be related at all, right? They didn't have to be of the same race or anything because it didn't matter. But these were things that they could have set up that could have been, could have told a better story. Anyway, I said I wasn't going to talk too much deeply into that kind of stuff, but I just want to explain why I still feel like Daima as a whole was just not executed very well. So let's talk a little bit more about the specific things. Vegeta Super Saiyan 3 transformation. Felt like fan service to me. 100% fan service. I just think that after decades of people asking, I wonder why Vegeta never turned Super Saiyan 3. What happened there? Why did he never reach that level? So then they decided to give it to us here, right? Fan service. That's what you call fan service. I'm not a big fan of fan service, okay? Because usually it's only done to satisfy a curiosity that fans have had instead of it coming from an organic place that means something story-wise, right? Instead of it coming from a creative place, it's just put in there just for fan service. And that's exactly what this Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta transformation felt like to me. There's no explanation of how he did it, when he first did it, how he was able to do it. Nothing. It just happens, and they barely even talk about it in the episode when it happens. Okay? So to me, it just felt like, oh, well, people have been asking about this for years, so let's give it to them. Never mind the fact that it creates huge plot holes and inconsistencies with Dragon Ball Super, which takes place after Dragon Ball Daima, because he never goes Super Saiyan 3 and Super. Okay, and for that matter, we can say the same thing about Goku's going Super Saiyan 4. But we'll get back into that in a second here. But right, so to me, it felt very, very fan servicey. It didn't mean anything. It doesn't hurt anything, but I don't think Vegeta needed to turn Super Saiyan 3. I think it's totally okay for these characters to have their own unique transformations, and for him to, just follow in every single step that Goku has previously established just feels kind of stupid to me, because that's really all they're doing here. They could have given Vegeta his own unique transformation here, but I don't feel like I feel like with modern day Dragon Ball, once again, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is that the writers now feel that flashy fights and transformations are all we need. It's like every series or every movie, so there has to be some kind of new transformation in a big flashy fight. And when you're just giving us that for the sake, it's almost like it's a formula now. And when it's a formula, it doesn't feel like it means anything, right? It's like, oh, well, we got a new series. Let's see who's going to transform into a bigger power with a different hair color. We talked about this before. It doesn't feel like it means anything anymore, these transformations. So, especially with this Super Saiyan 3 one for Vegeta, I just feel like it was unnecessary. I'm also not a big fan of the design of it. You might say, well, Tim, what do you mean? It looks just like the other ones. Well, actually it doesn't. Vegeta's hair kind of stands up, right? It kind of stands up and sticks out. Whereas with Goku and Gotenks, the hair kind of falls down. And I just think that looks better than having a big spiky ass, like super defined hair. I mean, that just looks weird to me. That's also kind of a problem I have with Beast Gohan. I think it doesn't look as good as it could look, because once it gets so big and so long, it doesn't look right. You should just let it fall. So I kind of wish they did that with it, but I can also understand that they were maybe just trying to give Vegeta a unique sort of transformation, at least visually, for himself there. Let's just jump ahead to the other, elephant in the room, and that is the fact that Goku turned Super Saiyan 4 in this series. Okay. I don't know. There's a lot that could be said about this decision to do so, because I'm still not entirely sure if it has ever been decided definitively and it has ever been confirmed by Toriyama, Toei, or anyone like that of whether or not Dragon Ball GT is considered canon. Okay. It could be, because it still takes place after all of this. It takes place after Z, after Super, clearly takes place after Daima. So it could still happen, so it could still be canon. Well, if it is canon, then this just completely fucked the canon completely with these transformations, right? Now, I'm not going to make a big deal out of that, because I think we all know that, hey, GT was made however many, 20 years ago. The current writers want to take their own liberties and do their own things with it now without necessarily having to be held to that canon. Because, if we go by canon, that Super Saiyan 4 transformation does not happen until GT. So when it happens there, it doesn't make any sense, because the idea would be that they have already seen this form before, years and years before. Once again, we know why. It's because the writers, they hadn't thought of this yet, right? So I'm going to give them some slack for that. But I would also argue that if it was a better written show by people who cared more about the canon, then they would be a little bit more careful with those kinds of decisions, But other than that, there's no need for me to nitpick it to death, because we all know, because they just decided to just do it because they felt like it was a good idea here. Now, what was confusing about it, specifically in Daima, is how this transformation happened. Okay, because we see Goku turn Super Saiyan 4 twice in Daima. Once as a kid, once as an adult. The first time it happens is he's getting beat by Goma. The older Namekian, I forgot his name, walks up, does some kind of magic, and then we see a whole sequence, and then Goku turns Super Saiyan 4. So the idea that was presented in that moment was that Namekian did something to him that triggered a transformation to Super Saiyan 4. We don't get any further explanation of it than that. Okay? That they just show that and it happens. Okay? So as if that's not enough of a problem in itself, because you can't just have some Namekian wave his hand and all of a sudden Goku's 5 times stronger than he was before. I mean, it's just a cheap, easy power boost, and none of us like it when they do that, right? Because those transformations need to feel earned. But that wasn't earned at all. But the second time it happens, Goku just transforms on his own. And the way that they explain it after, when Goku and Vegeta are talking about it, Goku makes it seem like it's a level that he reached on his own. Because Vegeta's like, well, what was that last transformation? What was that? And Goku's like, well, Majin Buu really pushed us to our limits, and I just kept training, So the implication there is that he reached Super Saiyan 4 by himself at some other point in time. So that contradicts with what we saw with the Elder Namekian with Kid Goku and what we saw with Adult Goku. Okay. Now it's possible I'm missing something there. Right. And if you guys want to write in, send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com to talk more about this. If I get enough emails, I'll come back with a follow-up episode and we can talk about it. Because as it stands right now, I have yet to Google anything. Okay. I'm coming fresh off watching the episodes. I'm sure if I went and Googled some stuff, maybe some of these answers would be, maybe some of these questions will be answered. But that's not the way this podcast works, right? I like to come on here and talk to you guys about it so we can talk about it like two friends who just watched the episode together. But I just found that was weird, because I'm okay. It's like, and then Goku turned Super Saiyan 4 for that second time, and then they all acted like it was their first time seeing it. They were like, whoa. It's like, well, he just did it. He just did it 5 minutes ago in their time when they were, but it was just a kid version of the same thing. Okay. With that being said, I also had a feeling that by the end of it, they were going to be adults again. I do have to say that I really, really liked that part. That part got to me. It worked. It had been so long since we saw the adult versions of them that when they turned into adults again, it felt good. And it was, it felt right, and it was exciting to see it. And I was very, very happy to see them be adults again. And then we got to see an adult Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta, which was cool. And he did the final flash. And look, there's no complaints about the fights here. Okay. Fighting and animation and Daima has been A1. It's been pretty great, especially these, the last 4 episodes of the series. Unfortunately, without a good story to ground you and stakes to make you invested and gravitas and meaning, then you're just watching a bunch of flashy stuff happen in front of your face. And that's what it felt like. Although I did enjoy what I was seeing, I thought the fights were very, very cool without any real context or meat to it. Just felt hollow. You know, the transformations felt hollow. The fights felt hollow. And that's just my personal opinion. It's okay. If this was also a movie, an hour and 30-minute movie, I could probably make the same argument, right? Because an hour and 30 minutes isn't necessarily enough time to do a shit ton of character development, but it forces you to only include moments that really, really matter, because you only have an hour and a half to tell the story. So then you cut all the bullshit out. And if it doesn't matter to the story or to the characters, then you cut it out, right? But here they put all this other nonsense in here to pad it and make it longer. Now, outside of all the canon problems that this creates, these transformations, because obviously there's a lot of problems that this creates for Super and GT, because we would immediately ask ourselves, well, if Vegeta was able to go Super Saiyan 3, why didn't he do it in Super, right? If Goku was able to go Super Saiyan 4, why didn't he do it in Super? I think we're just past the point now to where we even have to ask ourselves questions like that, because it's clear to me that, once again, modern day Dragon Ball writers just don't give a fuck, dude. They only care about the moment. They only care about giving us stuff that they think will make us happy right now. And there's not much concern for how it ties into the overall story, canon, anything. They're all about fan service. They're all about creating cool fight sequences and transformations. And, you know, and that, once again, I think that's how we got Gohan Beast. I think that's how we got Orange Piccolo. I think that's why we're getting this Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta and this Super Saiyan 4 Goku, is because they just want to create, you know, they're just, it's all about transformations and fights. And that's it. I mean, the rest of the stuff just seems to be completely getting, you know, tossed to the side. Also, and I assume this from episode 1, Gohan nowhere to be found in this series at all. And that's okay. I mean, we don't have to include every character, but we pretty much saw damn near everyone else, you know, even if it was briefly, because they were all turned into kids. Gohan would have been turned into a kid too, right? And so would Videl. I mean, she was involved in that Boo stuff. I don't technically think she counts as someone who helped to defeat Boo, but clearly, you know, she was still involved in that, and Gohan was definitely involved in it, and there's just no mention of him or anything in this entire series. So clearly that was a creative decision to do that, but it does make me curious as to, from their perspective, why they felt Gohan couldn't have contributed to this in some way, right? So I'm not saying I'm disappointed by that, but I'm just curious as to why they maybe decided to just leave him out. So, you know, something else that's notable here is the fact that this Super Saiyan 4 Goku is not the exact same as the one from GT. He has design differences. His hair on his head is brown or brownish red instead of black, right? Now that's a design change that I think actually makes sense, because his body hair is red. So it makes sense that the hair on his head would also be kind of reddish too, right? Like the same color as his body hair and the same color as his tail. So I didn't mind that. And I think there may even be some design differences with the eyes and the eye color and stuff like that. So I didn't mind that. Look, I've always liked the design of Super Saiyan 4. I was not crazy about, you know, how it came about in GT. I think I recall it being something, it was an artificial moon or something, that, at least for Vegeta's transformation, like it was, and Goku was grinding coffee beans or something, and Elder Kai pulled his tail out using some pliers. I mean, you know, that shit was silly. So I definitely prefer this, even though we don't really get a clear explanation of how it happened this time. But I think it's even still better than the way it happened in GT. Do I feel like this was necessary? No. Once again, fan service creates all sorts of plot holes, but I'm not going to worry about the plot holes anymore because the writers clearly don't care about them. They clearly do not give a damn. So why should I? So let's just talk about how this series kind of closed out. Obviously, we knew we were going to have a big battle with Goma. Okay. We also knew that this third eye, which we talked about in previous episodes, even though it just kind of was mentioned once or twice, and Hybis just happened to find it one random day and we didn't even see it. I mean, I think that all of that was really, really stupid. How he just happened to come upon this thing, in the mountains. But if you watch the little post-credit scene at the end of episode 20, which I'm not sure how I feel about, they go back to that store, the store that sold the bugs, and then it's revealed that these third eyes are just everywhere. And I guess that was just, I just took that as a little lighthearted sort of quirky Dragon Ball joke, which I guess is okay. But at the same time, we're already dealing with a show that doesn't have any stakes. And now you're just telling us, oh, you mean these damn third eyes are just everywhere and anyone could just take one of these things and become the most powerful being on, because a Super Saiyan 4 Goku was still not strong enough to beat Goma with that third eye. They had to knock it out of his forehead in order to depower him, which I'm a little bit surprised no one didn't think about that a lot earlier. Is, if you know that this thing is what's giving him power, because at this point, I'm pretty sure they knew that because there'd already been some discussion about it, then why spend all this time fighting? You should be trying to get that eye off of his head. So, of course, in a very convenient, sort of a way, Aransu says, oh, let me go get my book of magic, right? Of course, last minute convenient plot device. And of course, it tells you how, they have to hit him in the back of the head 3 times in order to dislodge this thing. I think it would have just made a lot more sense for them to just try to destroy it. I mean, getting hit in the back of the head 3 times seems like really easy. I mean, what if he just falls on the back of his head 3 times on accident during the fight? You know what I mean? I just think it would have made a lot more sense to be like, we have to get that eye, we have to remove the eye, and he's protecting it at the same time. I mean, that would have been totally fine. We've seen that happen in other shows and anime, Obviously, the eye is the weak point. We have to try to get it out by just pulling it, But once again, that's kind of a nitpick. They just decided that was the way to do it. So that's the way they did it. And it ends up being Majin Ku that does it. Now, I don't remember how much we talked about Majin Ku. I believe Majin Ku had been revealed by episode 10, but Majin Du, right? I don't remember exactly when he was introduced, but they made another Majin character, and I honestly don't think we needed 2 of them. I feel like Majin Du was pretty useless. I mean, sure, it was cool that he participated in the fight, and he's the one that beat the Tamagami, right? But from a writing standpoint, they could have just had Majin Ku do that. Like, we didn't need another character, right? We could have had one character that did everything Majin Du did, as well as what Majin Ku accomplished. That it could have been accomplished with the same character. And I feel like Majin Ku actually had a little bit of an arc, whereas Majin Du didn't, right? Majin Ku was kind of a disappointment, but at the end of the day, he ended up being useful, and he's the one who actually technically, I guess, defeated Goma. So there was a little bit of an arc there for him, right? He did accomplish something. He is a little bit different now than he was when he first showed up. And then he becomes the Supreme Demon King, which makes no sense at all. But I'm not going to make a big deal out of that, right? Because a lot of this shit's just silly anyway. Sure, someone who was born 5 days ago can become king of an entire world, and no one seems to care. But I think Majin Buu by himself could have been enough, and they could have just also had him do some of the same stuff that Majin Buu did, and it would have been good enough, I guess. But ultimately, he is the one that kind of shuts Goma down. Now, I mean, obviously, a lot of this stuff that happened in the last 4 episodes was just there for the sole purpose of giving us some cool action stuff, some cool fight scenes, which, once again, I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying that this doesn't feel like, previous Dragon Ball fights have felt, because they didn't have enough time to really spend. Well, let me rephrase that. They had plenty of time to do it, but they didn't do it. They spent a lot of time with a lot of bullshit that was just unnecessary, and they could have used that time to develop these characters and the story better, so that this epic fight that we get actually really felt epic, because it meant something, and it just doesn't feel like it meant anything. Now, just a couple other things that I wanted to mention that I thought was a little bit odd here. There's always a tendency for the writers to conveniently forget that Piccolo can turn himself into a really huge version of himself. That's not, once again, it's just not even a complaint anymore at this point. It's just an observation, because I mean, he hadn't done it in forever. And then in Dragon Ball Superhero, they had to fight a really big version of Cell Max. And Cell Max, he was just really big, and Piccolo made himself big to, compensate. That happened here with Goma, and Piccolo didn't do it this time around. For some reason, you could argue that, he had just become an adult again. Maybe he wasn't able to do it because he was a kid or whatever. I don't know. But I think the real reason is that it was convenient for the plot for him to not do it, right? Also, the fact that Goma's uniform looks a lot like Jiren's uniform. Okay. I don't know if everyone else, I don't know if you guys picked up on that or not, but it's incredibly similar to Jiren's outfit. It's not exactly the same. I think the pattern on it might be slightly different, but other than that, it seems to be the same colors. He's wearing the gloves and the boots, so I don't know if that was just like a low-key Easter egg, or if there's supposed to be a connection between the two of them somehow. But it could not have been a coincidence that they did that. But I don't know. Are we just supposed to speculate as to what that could have possibly meant? Are they from the same planet? I believe that Jiren was wearing that uniform because that squad that he was a part of, they all wore that, right? Or something similar to that. From whatever universe he was from, 11, it's been a while. I don't remember, but he was a part of a special forces or something like that. And they all wore those types of outfits. So I don't know. We're supposed to believe that Goma was a part of that, because he doesn't seem like doesn't seem like much of a warrior. I mean, a matter of fact, without the third eye, it seems like he wouldn't have been much of a threat at all. I mean, which is pretty much solidified, because once they knocked that thing out of him, he really can't do anything at all. So that was just another thing I caught much earlier on. Once he lost the cape, you could easily see what he was wearing under better. And I was like, well, why is he dressed like Jiren? So I don't know. Here's the thing. I know I'm leaving some stuff out because there was a lot I wanted to talk about and I didn't really make any notes. So I'm just kind of going from the top of my head. So I'm sure there's something else I want to mention, but if you guys have anything you'd like to add from that, and let me know your thoughts and opinions on Dragon Ball Daima as a whole, or if there's anything I missed that you want to talk about, just let me know. As always, if I happen to get a couple emails, I'll come back with another episode of the podcast. If not, then we'll just call it here, and that'll just be it for this one. But with that being said, I do have an email that I want to read here that I got from Brent. So once again, rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com for our email segment, which is called What Are You Saying? Okay. So Brent sent me this on March 20th. Brent, sorry, I know it's taken me a while, but I wanted to save your email just in case I decided to return with another episode of the podcast. And now that I can just read it here. Okay. So the subject line here says, hoping you continue the podcast eventually. Brent writes, wow, been a while since emailing you. Friggin' Dragon Ball Super dub ended in 2019, man. I was married when you started that podcast and divorced by the time you ended it. Crazy. I don't mean to laugh at that, Brent, but it's just the way you worded it is kind of funny. I'm sorry about the divorce, or I'm happy about the divorce if you're happy about it. I think Daima was a much harder sell than Super because folks knew it was a limited run. It takes place in a gap time between Z and Super, and the concept of returning to Kid Goku had been done before and definitely exhausted in GT. While I'm not a big While I'm not a big sub guy, this time the sub was easier to swallow based on the young actors they used in lieu of the legendary voices we were used to. Also, being that I had hoped the typical English dub voice actors would try to sound younger by adjusting their tone naturally or through manipulation, but instead they got new voice actors minus Kid Goku, so that disconnect was already there for me. Okay, I'll just pause there and just talk about that. What I've read so far. First of all, yes, been a while since Dragon Ball Super ended in 2019. I know that's crazy. Time is flying here. Okay. You mentioned the fact that the sub was an easier swallow for you because they used young actors instead of the legendary voices that we were used to. Okay, by that, do you mean that, because I did not watch the sub, right? So in the sub, did they not use younger actors, or did they just use all the same voice actors, but they just made them sound younger? Because I mean, especially in the case of Goku, the same woman does the voice regardless, right? It's always been Masako Nozawa. Man, I hope I'm not messing that up. Was that right? Sorry. It's always been her, right? For Kid Goku, adult Goku, whoever. So I could see that voice being the exact same, but I'm wondering about some of the other actors. Did they not do that with them? And, I also would have appreciated them using the usual actors, but just manipulating their voices to some extent. But I also can appreciate the fact that they decided to just give new voice actors an opportunity to be involved with the Dragon Ball project. So, none of us were crazy about this idea of turning them into kids. But once I accepted the fact that they were going to do that, I also accepted the fact that they would use different voice actors for the kid versions. So I'm okay with that. And yes, it's definitely cool to hear Stephanie Nadolny doing the voice for Kid Goku again. So, okay. Let's see. You also write, they could have also had real fun with Piccolo, since if he was reduced to the actual age they said they turned him into, which was 5-ish, right? Then based on OG Dragon Ball, Piccolo would still be a younger version of his adult self, which could have been hilarious. Okay, so what I think you mean by that is that obviously Piccolo is a lot younger than he looks, right? Because he is not that old. He just aged really, really quickly because of his Namekian heritage. But I feel like it was just convenient for the plot for them to do that, right? They just wanted him to be old enough so he could fight Goku. Okay. So he aged very, very quickly. So he technically is not that old. So if they were going to turn him into a kid, theoretically, he would still look the exact same because, I understand exactly what you meant there. I felt bad for you reviewing the first 10 episodes, especially never watching OG Dragon Ball. I think Toriyama was trying to capture the aloof, open fantasy world exploration he had in Dragon Ball and stretched it out to try and do so. I liked all the different random species of people, and like Dragon Ball, they never went too far into why certain dog people, demons, blue people, etc. exist here and also on Earth. part of that I like that it's just part of that I like that it's just the Dragon Ball world, even just Earth, is this big futuristic fantasy world where you get some lore here or there, but ultimately doesn't need a full explanation. Okay, yes, so these are very good points, Brent. I think I already mentioned the fact that I feel like obviously this series was supposed to try to recapture the magic of the original Dragon Ball, which is why it's an adventure story as opposed to just being another villain just showing up, right? Which is why he turned them into kids, which is why there's a bunch of random characters that'll show up random. And you're right, not everything is explained or anything like that, just like the original Dragon Ball. And that would also explain why the tone of this was a little bit more goofy and lighthearted, because they were kids and they're trying to win kids with this. And that's totally cool. All of that stuff I definitely get. And because of that, I do feel kind of bad that I gave this series as hard of a time as I gave it. You mentioned here that you feel bad for me reviewing the first 10 episodes, especially because I never watched OG Dragon Ball. Well, first of all, I did watch OG Dragon Ball. I didn't watch all of it. I haven't seen all of it. So listen, there's definitely a perspective here that, and I wouldn't blame anyone for having this perspective. I think it's totally fair to have a perspective where you just watch Daima and you just take it as it is and enjoy what there is to be enjoyed about it. And you say, hey, you know what, man, none of that stuff bothered me. I don't care about the plot holes. I don't care about the story dragging along. I just wanted to have a fun ride to celebrate the anniversary of Dragon Ball. And and I'm not saying that that's your perspective. I'm just talking about, generally speaking, for people that might view it that way. That's a totally valid way to view it as well. That's just not the way that I am particularly perceiving it, because, Dragon Ball's one of my favorite show of all time, Dragon Ball Z. And I'm going to compare everything that they do after it to Z, because why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? I think there's always going to be a part of me that hopes that they can get back on the level that they were with that show. Though I am accepting the fact that it's probably just done now. It's probably just never going to happen again. I think that time is gone. I think the new Dragon Ball doesn't have blood in it. It's not that violent. There's no profanity in it. Transformations don't have stakes anymore. It's just a bunch of flashy stuff with a bunch of multicolored hair characters, and that's all it's probably going to be from this point on. And that's not to say you can't still find some enjoyment in it, though, right? So, yes, not everything needs an explanation, and so I do kind of nitpick some of that stuff in Daima, but it's also because I know that they can do better, right? And if they didn't spend so much time doing shit that didn't matter, that time could have been spent giving some of those things an explanation, right? Because look, it's okay to make a show for kids and etc., but it can still be a good show, right? Okay, your next section here says, you got to remember too, especially with Daima, it's supposed to be geared towards kids, which attention spans are much less than you or I back in the day. I'm 36, and I think you're close to around there too, if I remember right. I am above 36, and that's all I'll say there. Okay. Okay. But yeah, once again, we just mentioned this. Yeah, sure, geared towards kids, but not completely, because there were a couple of like really adult humorous things in there. Goku did blow a hole through Goma's stomach with a Kamehameha, so even the way they showed it was a little bit, obviously there was no blood or anything, but puncturing a hole through a person's body, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily geared towards kids. I think largely it was made with kids in mind, but as always, you want to keep the OG fans happy too, which is why at the end, I think they decided to turn them back into adults, why they decided to do Super Saiyan 4, Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta, all that stuff, because kids wouldn't really be familiar with that. It's us, the adults. We're the ones who watch GT, so we know what that is. So that's nostalgia bait for us. right? So I don't think it was entirely intended for kids. I think it was a little bit of both, and they tried to, I'm sure if they could have had it their way, they could have made all the adults happy too. All right, next section here says, I gotta say it does get better soon after episode 10. There's some things that'll piss you off story-wise, but if you like the first Dragon Ball fight, the next one won't disappoint. I ask to take any retconning all in stride and enjoy it, as we don't get new Dragon Ball that often. I think that's a very, very important statement that you mentioned there, Brent. You said, I ask to take any retconning all in stride and enjoy it, as we don't get new Dragon Ball that often. Now that kind of goes in line with the other perspective that I was talking about, right? I'm sure there's some people that watch this show and just said, hey man, I'm just happy we got new Dragon Ball. Who cares if it's retconning stuff? Who cares if there's plot holes? Who cares about all of that, right? Once again, it's a very, very valid perspective. However, as someone who analyzes these shows on a much deeper level than just the surface level, because if I'm going to talk about it on the podcast, I have to, right? I'm going to be someone who mentions that kind of stuff, right? And I would rather them not do it, because at the end of the day, it would be nice to have a big, continuous canon Dragon Ball world that makes sense and doesn't have a bunch of plot holes in it and inconsistencies and stuff. But to your point, it's never really been that way. Even Dragon Ball Z has its inconsistencies and retcons itself in many different ways. So while like the retconning, while I don't like it, it's not a deal breaker for me at this point, because I'm used to it, right? So would I say I'm taking it in stride? Probably not, but I'm also not going to write off Dragon Ball for life because this one series wasn't good. I'm a Dragon Ball fan forever. I'm just going to take it a lot less seriously from this point on. I think, especially if it's a one-off 20 episode side series. I think they could have fixed a lot of problems with Daima if they just would have just made it not canon. Then they wouldn't have to explain any of this shit. It wouldn't matter if he went Super Saiyan 4. None of that stuff would matter, right? Because it'd be like, it's not canon. Who cares? But the fact that they're calling it canon is just, I'm going to have a problem with that for sure. But always thrilled to get new Dragon Ball. Okay, the next part here says, the fights are beautiful and animation is light years ahead of the pre-Tournament of Power bullshit. The pre-Tournament of Power bullshit animation we got in Super. 100% yes. Animation here, no complaints with the animation in this series at all. One thing I'll say that I've noticed from a lot of YouTube reviewers that do Marvel Easter egg episode reviews is that when they go on a diatribe of negative crap they didn't like and how they would do it differently, I tune the fuck out and I found I'm not alone there. There's enough negative shit going on right now outside of Dragon Ball world, and I think for a lot of people, anime, Marvel, etc. is our escape. What attracted me to Rock the Dragon and some YouTube episode reviewers for other media is the feeling that you're just talking about an episode with your friend and they're hyping up mostly what parts they liked and how some of it connects and making fun of where they fucked up. YouTube reviewers like New Rockstars, Screen Crush, and Heavy Spoilers all focus on how it sucked and not really any parts they liked that deserved more conversation than how it's not faithful to a fucking Marvel comic the average person hasn't even read. Okay, so I think I get what you're saying here, right? That when some people are reviewing things and talking about these properties, there's a tendency for the discussion to go toward how it's not faithful to the source material and how different it is from the source material and how the characters look and stuff like that, as opposed to just focusing on the things that are good and are faithful about it. And I don't like that either. I'm not a big fan of those types of discussions. I mean, and part of the reason I decided to call it after episode 10 is because I felt like I was turning into one of those people. I felt like every episode I was talking about negative stuff and how it wasn't Dragon Ball Z, and I didn't want to do that, so that's why I decided to back out and just you know, and just ease up on it, because that kind of negativity, I don't need to contribute to that. Like you said, there's a lot of negative shit going on in the world. You know, I don't want to contribute to that with a weekly podcast, no matter how entertaining it might be. Now, does that mean I'm going to like everything? Of course not. But if it ever becomes overly negative, then I have to reevaluate and ask myself if I want to have that sort of negative energy be a part of my weekly, regimen, right? So yeah, okay. Your next section here says, I hope this isn't the last of the Dragon Ball podcasting you do, and maybe you come back and do every few episodes of Daima as you collect pieces of episodes you like to talk about. Hopefully my rambling is understandable, especially since I found my phone fixes, quote unquote, my typing often in ways that don't make any sense. Until next time, have a good one, Brent. Brent, thank you so much. Great to hear from you. One of my longtime listeners there. You mentioned here, I hope this isn't the last of the Dragon Ball podcasting you do. And maybe you come back every few episodes. Well, obviously that didn't happen. Me coming back every few episodes, but I did come back. Whether or not this is the last bit of Dragon Ball podcasting that I do, I don't know. Every time I think it's my last time, I end up coming back. You know what I mean? Maybe for the next Dragon Ball movie, whatever that is, maybe I'll come back and talk about that the way I did with Dragon Ball Superhero. I don't know. I'm just finding that my Dragon Ball experience is just not what it once was. And that could be for a bunch of different factors, right? I'm not going to put all the blame on them. I do believe that modern day Dragon Ball is just largely different than what it was decades ago. Okay. But there's also no way around that. Nothing's the same as it was decades ago. A lot of things have changed. A lot of things have been watered down, changed for different reasons, because times change. People's sensibilities change. The things people find offensive change, right? And I don't know if they can get away with a Dragon Ball Z style show now that they can also market to kids and air on network television, with all the blood and the impaling and the severed limbs and all that kind of stuff. I think the world has just changed and they're trying to cater to more people. And that happens, This is a little bit off topic, but one of my favorite video game franchises, Dead Space. If you guys play video games, they might be familiar with a game called Dead Space, which was very, very violent, very horror game, impaled aliens, monsters, blood, everything, right? I love games like that. Resident Evil games are another favorite franchise of mine. They both did this. With Resident Evil 6, they started to back away from the horror aspect and they started embracing more action. With Dead Space 3, they backed away from the horror aspect and made it more action. They were trying to make their games more appealing to a wider audience base, because there were people that didn't like scary video games. So they said, man, okay, Dead Space 1 and 2, pretty terrifying games. But with Dead Space 3, studies show that we may be able to sell twice as many games by opening up our games to an audience twice the size by removing the horror element. And that didn't work though, right? So it's a tricky situation, because you can make some changes to try to get a bigger audience, but if you alienate your core audience and it's changed so much to where it's no longer the thing that made it popular in the first place, then you could end up worse off. And Dead Space 3 was a flop, and I believe Resident Evil 6 was a flop. I mean, it even kind of started with Resident Evil 5. And then they just ended up going back to what made it popular to begin with. Fingers crossed that happens with Dragon Ball, but I think Dragon Ball is still making so much money worldwide with these movies and TV shows and the video games and the action figures and shit like that, to where I don't think they feel the need to bring it back to that era. But hopefully whatever else we get is still good in its own way. I realize that there's still a lot of Dragon Ball Super manga out there that I And I'm not even familiar with what happens there. So if they decide to bring Dragon Ball Super back as an anime, will I watch it? Of course I will. Will I do a podcast about it? I have no idea. Probably not, though. And the reason why I say that is because, well, I feel like, Rock the Dragon Ball Super podcast was definitely probably the peak of what the level I'm going to reach in this world talking about Dragon Ball stuff. And even that podcast wasn't, it didn't reach enough people ultimately. So I could not see myself signing on for another 100 episode podcast about Dragon Ball just for the same thing to end up happening again, where, I have a steady listener base, but I would need a much bigger return on my investment at this point to justify that. Okay. So there's a really long way of saying that, will I continue to be a fan of Dragon Ball and watch Dragon Ball properties? Of course. Will I ever return to talk about it again? I really have no idea, but I can say it's less likely than it is likely. But I 100% appreciate you and everyone else who wants it to happen. Okay. That being said, guys, I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. I do feel like I probably left out a lot of stuff I want to talk about, and I'll probably remember something later on. If I get a few emails after this episode, I'll come back. Maybe there's some specific things you guys want to talk about that I missed. And if you guys want to bring those up and I get enough emails, I'll come back with one more episode and we'll talk about it. Okay. But for now, I'm just going to sign off here and say until next time for Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast. I'm your host, Tim Bridgewater. I will see you guys when I see you. So until next time, keep on rocking the dragon.